Right. So after we've explained social Darwinism by definition, the best way to really hone in the concept of introducing something new, a new terminology, a new idea, a new ideology, is to give a real example, right? So to better understand the theory of social Darwinism, we're going to look at how this policy or how this idea was applied in the policy of immigration. And this is simply the quote from the last video, right? Anyways, um, keep in mind that the ideology of social Darwinism is something that's going to linger in minds of the people in power at the same time that the people of different ethnicities, different language groups, different nationalities, different races will be coming, migrating to America, flooding the American labor market, helping to fuel the American economy during the Gilded Age, right? And in fact, the years between 1870 and 1920 were seen as like the heyday, the height of American immigration, in that over 25 million people will come to America seeking better jobs. And in terms of statistics, if we were to survey American population, we would find that 1 in 7 Americans were of foreign origin, so non American born. And most of the immigrants arriving to America during these decades were processed at two main immigration facilities. First of which is the Ellis Island. You are looking at it on the top image on the slide. You see the Ellis Island is right here, and we see the island with the Statue of Liberty right across it. The Ellis Island was a facility that will be processing immigrants, meaning when you arrive, on a ship, you will disembark, you will enter the facility, you will show them your papers, you will tell them where you're from, you will tell them your intentions of coming to America, how long do you want to stay, and things like that. Also, examining people for different diseases and things of that nature, right? So, Ellis Island was the immigration processing facility for people mostly coming from Europe. Whereas if you came from Asia, you will be processed at the so called Angel Island, which is an island near the city of San Francisco in California. Of course, processing people coming from or using the Pacific Ocean to cross over and to enter America as immigrants. Now, there's nothing new in me saying that America has a lot of immigrants. Historically, this is a country of immigrants, those who came in voluntarily and those who were brought here by force. However, what was different about immigration patterns in 1870s and 1920s was that immigrant picture or the category of immigrants will be different from these decades, right? So historically, or prior to the Gilded Age, prior to 1870s, the majority of American immigrants came from European countries that were in the European North and European West. So, kind of ethno-linguistical group that we are referring to here is titled as the Anglo-Saxons. So, people from North, Central, and Western Europe. So, these are your Germans, these are your people from the Nordic country like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, England, so countries of America, countries of European North and West, and typically these groups of people came to America in history because I don't know, they were fleeing religious persecution after the Protestant Reformation. So mainly they are of Protestant faith. Okay. Now, since the 1870s or after 1870s, the majority of immigrants will no longer be from these Anglo Saxon countries, right? Instead, the vast majority of immigrants in late 19th century were either Asian, specifically from the country of China, or they came from South and Eastern Europe. So countries like Ukraine, maybe Russia, Poland, Croatia. Remember Tesla? He came during these years. And Italy also, right? So countries that kind of ethnically, linguistically, culturally are different from these Anglo-Saxon groups who historically had populated America in the greatest numbers, right? One of the ways in which these two groups of immigrants differed, meaning Anglo Saxons who historically came to America before 1870s and those other groups who came after 1870s, is not only the language, but also religion, right? So we have Protestant religion. So these are your Baptist, your Methodist, your Presbyterian, right? Who were perceived by historians to be the founders of America, those who founded Massachusetts Bay Colony, for example, right? Versus people who now were coming to America who were either Catholic or they were Jewish, or if they were from Eastern Europe, they were Christian Orthodox. So, again, religiously, we do see a variation and change in the groups of individuals, immigrants coming to America. And these religious differences, these national differences, and also racial differences will unfortunately be the reason why a lot of people in America, again, influenced by social Darwinism, will start to think of them as quote unquote lower, as quote unquote weaker races of humans, right? Because, again, in the eyes of social Darwinists, it is the Anglo Saxons, those Germans, those descendants of people who came from England or Denmark or Netherlands or any other Northern European Protestant pure white countries. They are the true quote unquote Americans, right? And they are supposed to be the ones who should have the natural right to live in America. And it's not those people from South Europe or from Eastern Europe who practice different religion, who have different language groups. And we are, and also people from Asia, of course, have different language groups. They're also racially different to white Christian Protestants, right? And many of these native born Americans, by that I don't mean Native Americans, but European white immigrants who had for centuries or decades lived in America, they will believe that these newcomers, these new groups of immigrants, are a threat, that they are putting the traditional American culture, often defined as white Christian Protestant, into jeopardy. And they are like bad news, right? These quote unquote new immigrants will be widely described as members of different races, that they are not welcome, that they're just too different from what we define as what is American at the time. And as a result, the rise of immigration numbers will also lead to a rise of nativism, kind of like a byproduct of social Darwinism, which means that you are preferring your own people, your own quote unquote native people, your own culture. And consequently, you also hold prejudice, xenophobia, fear of strange, fear of different against those foreign born people, because you think that they are trying to destroy the American culture, whatever or however we define American culture to be at the moment, right? So, nativism is this belief supported by social Darwinists that the foreigners, those new immigrant groups, are serious danger, that they are going to take Americans jobs away. They will start to compete with Americans for social services, and for those reasons they should not be welcome, right? So the nativists are people who may have been born in America, but who obviously forgot that their ancestors were also immigrants just a few generations ago. So the nativists will rely on theories, on social Darwinist theories, to explain why they thought that these new immigrant groups are actually a threat. I have a primary source for you, the words of Elwood Cubberley. He was a professor at Stanford, so also someone who was social Darwinist, who would have had a good reputation or, I guess, broad audience to receive his message. Here is where we see him describing the groups of those new immigrants coming to America after 1870, and just listen to the kind of language he uses. He says, quote, "The Southern and Eastern Europeans are of a very different type from the North Europeans who preceded them. Illiterate, docile, lacking in self reliance and initiative, not possessing the Anglo Teutonic conceptions of law, order, and government, their coming has served to dilute tremendously our national stock and to corrupt our civic life." Okay, so there are several things I want us to look at in this quote. First, language. Anglo Teutonic, meaning Anglo-Saxon. Teutonic refers to Germanic groups or German groups specifically. We are using the theory that the Southern and Eastern Europeans are different. They are lazy. They don't know what they're doing. They will start to depend on us to tell them, to show them. They don't understand law and order. And they will dilute, meaning they will infiltrate, they will make it less important. They will weaken our national stock. They will weaken what true Americans is, and they will corrupt our civic life, meaning they will try to, they're coming with this agenda, right? He says they're coming with this agenda to change America and to make it entirely different from how we see America to be now. So, as we can tell from this statement, right, social Darwinists and many American policymakers will react to these waves of immigrants with fear. And they will observe immigrants as a threat to American culture, rather as somebody who can enrich American life and American culture and help the American economy, which is something that typically immigrants do, right? And in the process, they were believing that, these social Darwinists will be believing that they're actually protecting the traditional American way of life when they make arguments like this, right? So the goal here is to create a sense of fear that immigrants are bad and the immigrants will change fundamentally American society. And we have to do all we can to protect America the way it is right now, without influence from the immigrants. Now, even though all of the groups of immigrants will become frequent targets of social Darwinists and nativists, one particular group of immigrants will be the most, or the group that will be the most challenged by the social Darwinists, and they are Chinese immigrants who will experience very high rates of discrimination when they came to America in late 19th century. And historically speaking, in terms of Chinese immigrants, their contributions to America in 19th century, they typically came to or large numbers of them came into America during the gold rush in 1848, 1849. But then later in the century, they will be coming to California and other states in the in the Pacific coast to predominantly work as domestic workers, maybe garden workers, but most frequently in construction, so frequently as railroad workers. And in fact, between 1865 and 1869, over 10,000 of workers will come from China specifically to build the transcontinental railroad, or at least the western sections of the transcontinental railroad. Actually, 12,000 of them will come to work as railroad construction workers, right? Now, regardless of their contribution to American economy, given that we have large numbers of people from China coming to America, Chinese immigrants would become frequent targets, victims of discriminatory laws, discriminatory policies. An American government on federal levels, on local levels, they will pass different policies. In 1800s, basically anti-immigration policies, specifically targeting Chinese workers in the West. And the most infamous example of that is the so-called Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This was the law passed by the American Congress for, I think it was set for to be in effect for 10 years. And after 10 years, it was supposed to be renewed by the Congress, or the Congress was supposed to vote, should we continue with excluding Chinese immigrants on a yearly basis, right? But basically, Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 will be the first federal law or first law passed by the American federal government placing restrictions on the basis of persons' nationality and persons' ethnicity. Okay? So the act will effectively prohibit or place a ban, put a stop on Chinese workers or people from China coming to enter and coming to migrate to America for a period of 10 years, and will also bear those already in the country from becoming American citizens. So if you came from China, if your parents or grandparents are from China, and you have lived in America for a set amount of years, and you were thinking about your legal resident of America, and you're thinking about applying for citizenship, and you are from China, you had lived here for 5 or 10 years, you want to become American citizen, you will not be able to do that because you have Chinese ancestry, right? And again, the original purpose of this law was to maybe help American workers, maybe help American citizens who are trying to find jobs in construction, right? Maybe to help all of the people who are marching on the streets on all of these strikes, right? We have economic disparity as part of the Gilded Age. So partially we can blame social Darwinism for this bill being passed. But we could also think of the situation of despair of American workers during the Gilded Age as one of the reasons why this law was passed. Because the supporters of the Chinese Exclusion Act were typically working class Americans who will see, again, Chinese immigrants as a threat, as a competition for American jobs, arguing that limiting Chinese immigration would actually protect American workers and would increase the wages that American workers are willing to receive, assuming that Chinese immigrants or immigrants from anywhere are willing to work for lower wages, right? So there we see a poster of or it's like a clip from the local newspaper celebrating the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? It says, quote, "Hip hurrah, Chinese excluded. Democratic Chinese exclusion bill has been signed by our democratic president." And hip hurrah, the white man is on top. So here we see the twist of white supremacy that we associate with social Darwinism, right? And then Democratic president they're referring to is Chester Arthur, who was American president at the time, right? So in the years following the passage of Chinese Exclusion Act, the government will continue passing similar types of legislation in that they will also start to limit other groups of immigrants from coming to America. And this will start to expand from just focusing on Chinese immigrants to now also start to exclude immigrants of other different categories. So the culmination of social Darwinism and its application to immigration policy is the Immigration Act of 1917, meaning, this policy, very influential, now expanding onto the kinds of people we want to stop from coming to America. It's no longer just the country of China. Now we are thinking, how can we broaden this? How can we exclude even more people? And we think of the, again, Immigration Act of 1917 as the extension of the previous Chinese Exclusion Act, but this time again applying to a larger number of people. And according to the Immigration Act of 1917, listen to what kinds of people will be excluded. So, people from the Asiatic Barred Zone, referring to specific countries or territories in Asia and Middle East. So, Turkey, Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, these groups of people no longer be able to come to America. Over or a question of literacy was also put on the table and put in this law. So people who are over the age of 16 who are considered illiterate, so people who don't know how to read and write, cannot come to America. That's why we see like this political cartoon on a slide, when you were coming to America at the discretion of the immigration officer, you would sometimes be asked to pass a literacy test before you are allowed to be processed and before you can enter America. Also, we have concerns about contagious diseases. As you will learn in future lectures on the World War One, this is in the context of the World War One and America's involvement in it. We are concerned about the so-called Spanish flu or the influenza pandemic that was ravishing America and world globally, and during the World War One. So we are concerned about people with contagious diseases. We had seen something similar during COVID pandemic when we had placed restrictions on people traveling to America, or you have to have a proof of vaccination if you wanted to enter America. So that kind of played into that restriction for immigration. Also, people who are mentally or physically disabled. Because remember, like I told you, when we were talking about definitions of social Darwinism, if you are not able bodied or if you have some sort of mental illness, you may become a drain to the American medical system. And we simply do not want to welcome you for that reason. You are seen as the weaker species in the eyes of social Darwinists and the lawmakers. Hence, you should not be welcome to come to America. Also, the people with criminal record, including sex workers, polygamists, or people practicing polygamy, meaning marriage of multiple wives. I believe that this policy was to prevent people coming from Arabic countries, people who may be Muslim, who may sometimes engage in practice of polygamy, people who are alcoholics or vagrants, meaning people who are maybe homeless or jobless, right? We are no longer welcoming them. All of this, again, at the discretion of immigration officer who decides when they receive you if you belong to one of these categories. And also political radicals. If you if you carry a membership card from the Communist Party, for example, you will not be able to enter America, right? So again, we are creating this fear. This Immigration Act was put in place to ensure that America is the country of the law and order, that we exclude all of these groups of people we deem as different. And we are going to be thinking that this is the way of protecting American culture and protecting American way of life, and also in a way protecting American workers, right? So, anyways, this was these two laws, Chinese Exclusion Act and the Immigration Act of 1917, are two examples of the application of social Darwinism to domestic policy or to immigration policy specifically in America. And in the remainder of the module materials, you will learn how the policy of social Darwinism was applied to American imperialism and reasons America listed as reasons that we had to colonize or conquer other countries around the world.